The bridge to the ancestors did, of course, break. And in 1532, God gave the Incas his answer. The Spanish arrived. In the Battle of Cajamarca, 7,000 Incas were slaughtered in a single day. Within 50 years, 5 million were dead. The whole of what we grandly call the Spanish conquest was to the Incas nothing but the closing scene of a tragedy long since foretold in the stars. The Incas had one last surprise for Bill Sullivan. When he looked at attempts to decode astronomy from myths from other civilizations, thousands of miles away from Peru, and millennia older than the Incas, he found the code was the same as the Incas.
The issue is whether or not people traveled and whether our ancestors were connected to a much wider and a much more widely distributed civilization than our history books now tell us.
Bill was confronted now with a bigger story even than he had found so far. Could it be that the Incas' astronomical knowledge was a glimpse back to a time when ancient peoples traveled across seas and continents, taking with them their fascination and expertise with the stars?
The astronomical cosmology that the Incas had and the techniques that they used to encrypt and transmit the information that they were gathering about the sky is no different from the techniques that you find in the Vedas, in the Egyptian pyramid texts, in the myths of Sumer.
If people were traveling in ancient times, the question was, how far back did it go? Were the Incas a last vestige of a culture which existed before recorded history began, and of which we are only now recovering the first traces?
I think the Inca Empire was the last culture on the earth operating fully with ancient cosmological principles, which may already have been old when the pyramids were built.
What had alerted Bill to this larger story was finding the Inca code cropping up elsewhere in the world. But he'd also found that there were things from those distant cultures in the Inca myths.
One of the early chronicles was a complete list of all the 5 visible planets with their Quechua names. The characteristics might as well come from a schoolboy's notes on Greek mythology. Jupiter's the emperor, Saturn's the father of time and fierce, Mars the god of war, and so on.
Once again, what Bill found in the myths, Fernando showed him on the ground. Right in the middle of the Lama and Pyramid complex, overlooking Ollantaytambo, is a monument that Bill felt implied cultural exchange between the New World and the Old.
The first thing is the utter strangeness of a 150-foot-high image of a gentleman with a beard. Now, of course, that corresponds exactly to the myths from the time of the conquest that were collected, that the god Huiracocha was a tall, bearded stranger carrying a staff. It also goes without saying that native South Americans don't have facial hair.
It wouldn't make any sense for the Andean god to have a beard, except that in the myths Huiracocha is connected with the planet Saturn, and that all around the world, Saturn is depicted as an old man with a beard.
We still to this day have an image of Saturn as Father Time, and he carries a staff and he's old. In his grim aspect, he's the Grim Reaper. Well, in Andean mythology, the creation of the world took place under the auspices of a tall, bearded stranger who carried a staff. Well, I understood immediately why mention of this is dropped in the academic literature, because it runs absolutely counter to all anthropological theory that ideas could have traveled over that vast of a distance. I mean, the rules in anthropology is, here's the Greeks, there's the Atlantic Ocean, there's Amazonia, there's the Incas, and ain't no way the two are going to be talking to each other.
I have been interested in the history of watercraft for much longer than I've been interested in the history of astronomy. I was working on watercraft actually when I was in high school, and that puts it back 60 years now. So I've spent 60 years looking at these kinds of problems. And having looked at them and looked at the kinds of watercraft that are available, I think that the idea that there was no contact across oceans because of the watercraft is a straw man. There was an abundance of capable watercraft. If you can travel 20 miles by watercraft, you can probably travel much, much farther with good luck. I think that there will be very major changes in our understanding of prehistory over the next 20 years. There were contacts back and forth between different parts of the New World and with cultures outside the New World, and probably contacts which had influences in both directions. I think they've been in contact across the oceans for at least 15,000 years. That's putting it earlier than a lot of people would like to.
So the reason that Bill Sullivan has found a match between astronomical knowledge in Greece and Peru could be because the knowledge crucial to seafaring people would be knowledge of the stars in order to navigate.
You know, if I could ask my critics one thing of them, I'd ask them to read what I've written.
And one of the few scholars who has read Sullivan's work is Professor Kelly.
When I first read Bill's manuscript, I was struck by the fact that he was able to take a particular mythic event and show that that event occurred at a particular time on the basis of at least 6 different techniques of analysis. It wasn't that he was reaching the same answer or reaching one answer and then fitting a whole bunch of things in. He was actually able to demonstrate the same date chronologically on the basis of his analysis of different aspects of the same myth. To me, this particular myth, which gave these different ways of getting to the same result, that's impressive stuff.
I really consider myself a very lucky man. I found something that I was passionately interested in, which is the possibility that our past is more rich and more accessible than we know. I think it's correct to say that the Incas were the last living branch of an ancient tree. And it may be that the greatest Inca legacy will be that we will return to our own past with fresh eyes and learn that we, all of us, come from a common culture. We people of the 20th century have almost no clue about the nature of our past, and how ironic it is, since these records, which we call myths, are lying around in libraries gathering dust.